Still, there's male pregnancy, child rearing, smut all over the place, elements of nesting behavior, deep entrenched trauma, power bottoms, and nodding. Hi, welcome back to my channel. Today, we'll be discussing Minmotion Syndrome by Niji. Before we get started, there will be spoilers, so if you don't want to be spoiled in this manhwa, go and click off now. No worries, I'll catch you next time. For those of you who decide to stick around, let's go over some content warnings. There may be references to gang activity, human trafficking, blood, violence, forced abortion and or miscarriage, drugging, impreg, blackmail, kidnapping, gun violence, extortion, sex work, including sex as repayment of debt, confinement, stalking, power imbalance, social gap, drug use, drug addiction, fertility issues, rape, prejudice, sexism, specifically in regards to secondary sex, enslavement, BDSM, including non-consensual, torture, death, murder, suicide, mentions of gambling, manipulation, nepotism, strained familial relationships, obsession, slut-shaming, self-hatred, child abuse, child abandonment, classism, gossiping, inappropriate relationships between teacher and student, mental illness, obsession, and corruption, as these things do appear in the manhwa. But if that's okay with you, let's go and get started. Park Jae-in is powerful. He's much more powerful than most people would expect for an Omega. Despite the role society expects of him, Jae-in has worked his way up from no one to the boss of a gang. Part of the reason he's so successful is because his body no longer functions as an Omega's should. Most people don't even realize he is an Omega since he gives off no pheromones, doesn't go into heat, and isn't built like the average Omega. This works in his favor, though it is a painful reminder of why he is the way he is and why he's in the line of work to begin with. Thankfully, something to help take his mind off things falls into his lap. Namely, it's a young alpha named Seo Taeyun. Taeyun's Omega father, the only parent he ever knew, died, leaving a mountain of debt behind. Jae-in decides to pay off the debt in exchange for Taeyun himself. Though Taeyun is rebellious, he doesn't have anywhere else to go, so he acquiesces. But as these two spend more and more time together, Jae-in's dormant Omega characteristics begin to stir. And though Taeyun has his own issues with being an alpha, he's growing to enjoy how his role as an alpha affects Jae-in. But the man who caused Jae-in to become what he is to begin with is stirring too, and he's an alpha powerful enough to take everything from Jae-in all over again. To start with, I always find it so interesting when the art is actually better earlier on than it is later. Usually the beginning art might be a bit shaky for the artist because they're getting used to the characters, their designs, and their personalities, so I'm always shocked when it turns out to be the opposite. I wouldn't say the art is bad or anything, but there's a distinct issue that isn't present early on, but does appear later, and that is sloping faces. When the characters are face on or complete profile, this isn't an issue, but the moment they're at an angle, their faces have this super awkward slope to them that I hate. Something else I dislike is the white open mouths. That's a pretty common attribute across manhwa, to have an open mouth with nothing in it, but something about the shapes of their mouths with it is just so unattractive to me. It sucks because I find Jae-in to be one of the sexiest characters out there, so if it weren't for these things, the art would be impeccable, but here we are. It's not the worst art by any means, but it does have some glaring issues, also yaoi hands. But though the art isn't the best or most consistent, this story gives me everything I look forward to in Omegaverse stories. I'm a fan of non-con, though for some people this would be a negative. Though if it makes a difference, the Omega is the perpetrator in some of it, which is unique. Still, there's male pregnancy, child rearing, smut all over the place, elements of nesting behavior, deep entrenched trauma, power bottoms, and nodding. I'm not going to pretend the story is perfect by any means. Still, the Omegaverse world has so many delectable bits that make it one of my favorite settings of all time that it's hard for me not to love any story with so many aspects of that setting in it. I also must mention that we actually see Jae-in's pregnant belly. As much Omegaverse is out there, seeing a visible baby bump is pretty rare, and seeing it on Jae-in is provocative, as our precious alpha Taeyun says. It has many of the standard Omegaverse elements we usually see, but with a very powerful bottom reminiscent of the leading Omega from Unromantic Romance. It just scratches an itch for me as an Omegaverse fanatic. This goes beyond Omegaverse though. There's a lot of corruption, mobsters, and the like, which leads to a narrative fraught with intense revelations. It feels a bit like a mystery or thriller, so even if you're not as voracious about Omegaverse content as I am, I think there's still something there to really up the ante. The revelation about Taeyun's parentage, the reasoning behind Jae-in's ex's cruelty, and the exploration of trauma and healing add so much to your standard Omegaverse setting. It certainly isn't for everyone, of course, as there's a ton of violence, mental and physical abuse, and toxic relationships all over the place, but it's still such a good time. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention one of my favorite parts about this whole story, Jae-yoon. After all the pain and suffering in the main story, we're blessed with a ton of sweet and fluffy family time. I can't tell you how many times I've I've reread the extras because they just bring me so much joy. There is more drama to be had in the extras, don't get me wrong, but there are a ton of fluffy moments. We also get a lot more development for the side characters, such as Jayen's boys, which I really appreciated. However, I don't think these should be extras because so much is revealed in them that completes the main story. Unlike many other side stories and extras in other manhwa, they feel necessary. Just be aware that the extras are not truly extras and they are a must read. With all that being said, as an Omegaverse fanatic, I adore this. I feel like it's been a while since I've read something with actually visible impreg and a decent amount of child rearing, and it was such a good time. This is a very dark title, so if you're hoping for a romance free of toxicity and violence, you're in the wrong place. But if you're like me and enjoy things on the darker end of the spectrum, this is a good time. There are stronger Omegaverse titles out there, so it's hard for me to call it a favorite, but it's really close. I liked it so much that I bought an acrylic stand for it, so do with that information what you will. So, have you read Minmotion Syndrome? If so, what do you think? Do you agree with my assessment? Do you not? Let me know in comment below. Otherwise, I'll catch you next time. Bye!